It's not a story about passion or betrayal. It's a story about fiction that got a little too close to the truth, and how I found myself written into a book I didn't know existed. My name is Daniel Preston. I'm 42, an accountant by trade and temperament. I've always believed in balance sheets, early dinners, and finishing things I start. My wife, Claire, was the opposite. A dreamer, vibrant, thoughtful, a lover of art and books and the kind of abstract things I never quite understood. That was part of the attraction, I suppose, opposites and all that. We met in our early 30s. She was working part-time in a library while finishing her master's in comparative literature. I helped her file taxes for the first time and somehow left with her phone number. A year later, we were married. We didn't have children, but we had comfort. Quiet evenings with her reading and me doing spreadsheets, vacations to the mountains, birthdays at home with red wine and her favorite jazz records. Things didn't fall apart all at once. It started with a woman named Victoria. Claire met her through a community literary club that met every other Wednesday at the town library. Nothing unusual. Claire had always been part of book clubs, writing groups, open mic nights. But Victoria was different. She wasn't just another member. She was a published author. Mid-40s, polished, sharp. Her novel had recently made some minor waves in a regional magazine. It wasn't bestseller material, but it was enough to impress Claire. They bonded quickly. At first, Claire would come home raving about Victoria's insights, her knowledge of structure, her incredible way of understanding people. I listened with half a smile and a nod. It was typical Claire, enthusiastic, generous with her admiration. Soon, Victoria was coming over for dinner. She had this elegant way of holding herself, like someone who always knew she was the smartest in the room, but never had to say it. We talked about books, though I mostly listened. Claire and Victoria could go on for hours about themes and symbolism and what made a character believable. I just refilled the wine glasses and cleared the dishes. Over time, their meetings grew more frequent. The club wasn't enough. They started meeting privately to work on projects. Claire began spending entire Saturdays at Victoria's house, helping her edit a new manuscript. Then she started staying overnight once a week, saying it was easier than driving back late. Victoria's place was across town, about 40 minutes away. Claire insisted it was all about efficiency. I trusted her. I had no reason not to. But something changed. She was still affectionate, still kind, but less present, less curious about my day. We stopped cooking together on Sundays. She used to leave little notes in my planner. Don't forget lunch, or wine night tonight. Those disappeared too. When she was home, she was distracted. When she wasn't, I stopped asking. I didn't think it was an affair. At least not the kind I'd feared in the past. There were no strange numbers on her phone, no perfume on clothes, no nights out in heels and lipstick. Claire was still Claire, but she talked about Victoria too much, and always with a certain softness. She understands me, she'd say once, in passing, after a minor argument we had about bills. It's like she hears what I don't even say. I remember nodding, pretending not to feel the sting. At one point I wondered if there was another man, someone Victoria had introduced her to, maybe. Someone she was meeting through this new artistic world. But the few times I tried to bring it up, she dismissed it quickly. That's ridiculous, Dan. You're imagining things. So I stopped pressing. I didn't want to be that guy, the suspicious husband, the paranoid one who ruins something by simply not trusting. I let it go. Until the day I found the folder. It was early morning. Claire had already left for the weekend, another writing retreat at Victoria's. I was looking for one of my accounting files on our shared desktop. We had a separate folder labeled Claire Writing, normally off limits for me. But that day, a file caught my eye. For V only, draft 3. I didn't open it out of curiosity. I opened it because of instinct. What I found changed everything. The story was written in third person, tight, clean prose. A literary style Claire often admired. The characters were thinly disguised, but I knew them. One was a reclusive writer, jaded but brilliant. The other, a married woman, trapped in a practical marriage with a man who never truly understood her. The details were too specific. A scene set in a red kitchen with a cracked window frame, the same one we'd argued about repairing for years. A moment describing the way the husband organized his closet by color. A fight about money that played out word for word from one we'd had months ago. The names were different. The timeline adjusted. But I was there. My life, my flaws, my house, our past, all woven into the background of a romance that, even in its tame language, suggested more than friendship between the two women. I stopped reading after 20 pages. It wasn't just a draft. It was a confession, coded, literary, but no less real. Suddenly, everything made sense. The overnight stays, the quiet smiles, the dismissive tone when I asked about Victoria. I hadn't been imagining things. I'd just been reading the wrong book. Claire had fallen for Victoria, or Victoria had pulled her in, and they were using fiction as both shield and sword. Whether they crossed a physical line didn't matter. She had left me emotionally a long time ago. I just hadn't noticed. But I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to fight. I was going to read. And I was going to find out what they thought they could hide in plain sight. I spent the rest of the weekend in a quiet, steady haze. I didn't confront Claire when she came home late Sunday evening. I didn't ask about her writing retreat, or how Victoria was doing, or whether she had finished the third draft of that manuscript I clearly wasn't supposed to read. Instead, I smiled. I asked how the roads were. She kissed me on the cheek like nothing had changed. And maybe, for her, nothing had. But everything had for me. I made a copy of the draft and saved it to a private folder on an encrypted flash drive I used for client backups. I began to catalog things, dates, receipts, changes in routine. It wasn't about catching her in the act anymore. It was about building a map of where I had been blind. Over the next few days, I became a quiet observer in my own home. Claire, it turned out, had already grown used to my silence. She'd spend evenings curled up on the couch with her laptop, headphones on, editing. I'd sit across the room, watching her smile at the screen, biting her lip as she typed, lost in a world she no longer shared with me. I checked her calendar. Workshop, Thursday, 6 p.m. to 10 p.m., Vic's studio. That one stood out. Not just the time, but the wording. Studio. Victoria wasn't just her friend anymore. She had become a creative anchor, someone whose presence seemed to demand secrecy. Thursday came. Claire left after dinner, light jacket on, small leather bag slung across her shoulder. No makeup, nothing special. Just another casual evening with her writing group. I waited 20 minutes, then left. I didn't follow her, not directly. I drove to the neighborhood near Victoria's home, parked around the corner, walked past slowly, casually, like I was on an evening stroll. There weren't many lights on in the house, but one upstairs window glowed faintly, a warm yellow behind closed curtains. I didn't know what I was looking for. I just knew I needed to confirm what I already felt. On the drive home, I remembered something from the draft. A line that had stuck with me since the first read. He never saw it coming. Because I was always honest, just not with him. That was Claire's voice. Thinly veiled, wrapped in fiction, but it was her. Her words. Her betrayal. And somehow, it hurt more that it was written down, immortalized on a page, rather than whispered in the dark. Over the next week, I read every version of that manuscript she had saved. There were 5 drafts total, dating back 6 months. Each one got bolder. The characters more defined. The relationship deeper. By the final draft, there was no ambiguity left. It was a love story. One that happened in my house, while I made dinner or watched TV in the next room. She even described the guest bedroom, the one she had been sleeping in lately for back pain, she said. In the book, it was referred to as our sanctuary, the place where the rest of the world didn't exist. I don't know how long I stared at that paragraph. Minutes, maybe an hour. The words blurred, and all I could hear was her voice, reading it aloud. At work, I started researching defamation laws, privacy invasion, the difference between fictionalization and exposure. I wasn't planning revenge. I was planning protection. If this book ever saw the light of day, I didn't want to be a character. I wanted legal grounds to keep my life from becoming someone's paperback tragedy. Then came the final straw. One afternoon, Claire left her laptop open while she took a call in the other room. I wasn't looking to snoop, but it was right there. The screen glowing softly. The file titled, Query Letter, Final. She was submitting the manuscript. It wasn't just a private exercise anymore. She was trying to get it published. I opened the document. A neat, professional letter, addressed to a mid-sized independent publisher in Oregon. She described the novel as a semi-autobiographical exploration of forbidden connection and quiet rebellion. She said it was rooted in real emotional experience. She said it had been a catharsis, born from personal risk. I closed the file. Slowly, carefully. Later that night, I made dinner, her favorite, lemon chicken with roasted thyme potatoes. She was surprised, but smiled. We ate together like we used to. Talked about nothing. She didn't mention the submission. I didn't mention that I knew. That weekend, she left again, another retreat. I didn't follow her this time. Instead, I visited a friend of mine, an old college roommate who had become a publishing attorney in New York. Over coffee, I told him everything. Not the drama, not the emotions. Just the facts. He gave me a list of steps. What to do. What to save. What to say if the manuscript moved forward. Even if she changes the names, he said. If it's recognizable to you, and to others, you have a case. It wasn't about suing her. It was about drawing the line. About taking control of the story. Because up until that point, Claire had been writing both versions, the fiction and our reality. And I was just the backdrop in both. That was about to change. I started documenting everything. Screen captures, email drafts, the timeline of our lives versus the manuscript. I even created a private journal, not for therapy, but for clarity. I wanted to be sure I wasn't overreacting, that I hadn't misunderstood. But no matter how many times I read it, the truth was still there. She had replaced our marriage with a story. She just forgot I could read. Claire got the email on a Wednesday. I knew because I saw it pop up on her phone while it was plugged into the kitchen charger. Just one line of the preview visible. We loved your voice. Can we set up a call? She smiled to herself when she read it. That soft, distant smile I hadn't seen in years. It wasn't for me. It wasn't even for Victoria. It was for the version of herself she had written. And that version was finally about to be real. I said nothing. That evening, over dinner, she mentioned it casually. Oh, that manuscript I've been working on. I sent it out to a few indie publishers. Just testing the waters. I looked at her, measured. Anything come of it? She shrugged, too rehearsed. 1 or 2 bites. Nothing solid yet. She lied. That was the moment I knew she didn't think I mattered in the story anymore. I was just a background character. The quiet husband, sitting politely on the sidelines while she authored a whole new identity. What she didn't know was that I was already planning to write my own ending. The next morning, I called Daniel, the publishing lawyer I had spoken to earlier. We went over the potential risks again. Claire's manuscript wasn't just inspired by our life. It was our life. Names changed, sure. But places, dates, events, even side characters that mirrored our neighbors and mutual friends? Too close. Daniel advised me to prepare a cease and desist letter in advance. Not to send it yet, not until there was a confirmed publishing deal, but to be ready, and to gather statements from anyone who could verify the resemblance. That was easy. I reached out to Melissa, one of Claire's old friends who had quietly distanced herself since Victoria came into the picture. Melissa had always been diplomatic, but I sensed she'd noticed something off too. We met for coffee. I'm not asking you to take sides, I said carefully, but I need you to read something. And tell me if the woman in it sounds familiar. She did. 2 days later, she sent me a message. It's her, down to the way she twirls her necklace when she lies. I added her response to my file. Meanwhile, Claire was now fully absorbed in meetings with the publisher. She took Zoom calls in the bedroom, kept her notebook close, even started mentioning a potential writing retreat in the Pacific Northwest if things moved forward. She didn't ask if I wanted to come. One night, while she was out brainstorming with Victoria, I opened her email again. I know it wasn't right. But then again, neither was writing me into a novel as the absent-minded, emotionally distant husband, only to replace me with a stand-in that happened to be her actual affair. Yes, I said affair, because tucked away in the publisher's notes on the manuscript was a line that made my stomach sink. The relationship between the narrator and the muse is tender, brave, and ultimately redemptive. It's clear this story came from lived experience. She didn't even try to hide it. I didn't explode. I didn't confront her. Instead, I launched a quiet campaign. First, I contacted a respected forum for writers, one Claire had submitted to before, and posted anonymously in their legal discussion section. I shared excerpts of the manuscript with redacted names and asked if anyone else had dealt with being fictionalized without consent. The thread took off. Other writers chimed in. Editors. Even a small publisher. Then came the messages. One woman, who ran a blog dedicated to ethical publishing, reached out privately and asked if she could do a piece on auto-fiction gone wrong. I agreed, under condition of anonymity. The article was titled, When Real Lives Get Fictionalized, and destroyed. It didn't mention Claire by name, but it quoted directly from the manuscript. And anyone who knew her, they'd know. That was the crack that started the collapse. 2 weeks later, Claire came home in a foul mood. She slammed her keys on the counter and muttered something about narrow-minded people and jealous hacks. She didn't elaborate, but I knew. That same week, I sent the cease and desist to the publisher. Daniel's team worded it carefully, citing privacy violations, recognizable character depictions, and the harm to my personal and professional reputation. The publisher paused all forward momentum. Claire was furious. She accused me of sabotaging her dreams, of being insecure, of trying to control the narrative. I looked her in the eye and said, "You already did. You just forgot who you were writing about." She didn't respond. That night, she left and stayed at Victoria's. The silence that followed was oddly peaceful. In the weeks that followed, Claire's submission was pulled from 2 other publishers who'd received it through referral. Word had quietly spread that the manuscript was problematic. Not legally actionable per se, but reputationally dangerous. Bloggers debated it. Writers whispered. Editors passed. Victoria stopped returning Claire's calls. Apparently, she had gotten what she wanted, a lived experience, emotional chaos, and a draft to edit. But now that there was fallout, she ghosted her. Claire lost her muse. And suddenly, she didn't want to write anymore. There's something strange about watching someone unravel slowly. You don't notice it at first. It's not the stuff of movies, with screaming fits or dramatic exits. No, real unraveling is quieter. A skipped dinner here, a forgotten appointment there. Emails left unread. Coffee growing cold on the counter. Claire had once moved through the house like she owned every inch of it. Now she walked around like a guest overstaying her welcome. The publisher's decision to drop the manuscript came officially in an email she received late one Thursday night. She sat on the couch, laptop open, face blank. I was in the next room and heard nothing but the soft sound of her wine glass being set gently, too gently, on the table. Later that night, she asked, "Did you do it? Did you send that letter?" I didn't lie. I did. She swallowed hard. "You know what this meant to me." I know exactly what it meant. That's why I stopped it. She didn't sleep in our bedroom that night. She didn't say another word, either. The literary blogosphere didn't take long to chew things up. Once the initial post gained traction, smaller channels picked it up. Autofiction ethics became the week's hot topic. One YouTube book reviewer even made a video titled, "Is your spouse the next victim in your novel?" I didn't ask for attention, but I didn't hide from it, either. Daniel advised me to stay quiet and dignified. Let the facts speak for themselves. You're not in this for a public fight, he reminded me. You're defending your life, your name. But the damage to Claire's reputation was real and growing. The manuscript had already been passed to several indie agents. 2 of them withdrew interest. One sent Claire a message that read, "After reviewing new context around the material, we feel it's best to part ways." She started snapping at everyone. At her mother on the phone. At store clerks. At me, when I asked if she'd be home for dinner. Then, something shifted. She began to act sweet. Apologetic. She made me breakfast one morning. Bought my favorite coffee, the kind she used to roll her eyes at for being overpriced and boring. She even asked if I wanted to go with her to the next book club meeting, the same one I was never previously invited to. I wasn't fooled. She had lost Victoria, lost the book, and now she was circling back to the last familiar thing left standing, me. But this wasn't about love. This was survival. I kept notes, not out of paranoia, but out of necessity. Every conversation, every offer, every little manipulation wrapped in kindness. One night, she came into the room holding an old photo of us. Younger, sunburned on a Florida beach. "Do you ever miss that version of us?" she asked, her voice small. I looked her in the eyes. "I miss the version of you that didn't use people for inspiration." She left the room in silence. The legal process was nearing its end. There would be no massive settlement. We weren't celebrities. But Daniel was confident we had done enough to establish public misuse of private life. And, more importantly, we'd warned anyone else from taking the story further. Then came the final confirmation. Claire's writing fellowship, the one she had recently applied to, quietly rescinded its offer. That was the last thread. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just folded. Stopped writing. Stopped going out. Stopped pretending. And one evening, she finally said it out loud. "I think we should separate." I nodded. That's probably for the best. I never thought it would go this far, she said. I did. She paused. Did you ever love me? I loved who you were, not who you became to chase a plot twist. We agreed on the division. No fights. No lawyers beyond Daniel filing the basics. She moved out a week later. Word spread through the local writing community, not from me, but from the people who had read the blog posts, seen the quotes, and connected the dots. A few people still defended her. Others distanced themselves quietly. And Victoria? She vanished just as fast as she had appeared. From what I could tell, she had moved on to a different creative immersion. Another story, another person to base it on. Claire never mentioned her again. A few months passed. I heard rumors Claire tried to submit a new piece under a pen name. Completely different genre, even different style, but nothing came of it. The moment had passed, and she knew it. It's odd, the power of a story. Claire thought she could control hers, that by putting it down on the page first, she could dictate how people remembered it. She forgot something important. In real life, people talk back. They see the truth in between the paragraphs, and they don't always forgive the author. There's a silence that settles after the dust clears, not the peace people talk about, but something lonelier. It's the kind of quiet that shows up when you've run out of excuses, when there's nothing left to fight for. Claire and I weren't enemies anymore. We weren't partners either. We were two people who had shared a house and now passed like ghosts through the same town. She had moved into a small rental across town. I heard through mutual acquaintances, mostly from the library and old book group circles, that she'd stopped attending any public events, even the ones she once hosted. Her last attempt at salvaging her writing career came in the form of a self-published short story on a blog. No names, no locations, just a piece called Unwritten Agreements. It was about a woman whose husband couldn't understand her need to live fully. A few readers commented. Some gave her sympathy, but the audience she once had was gone. Because readers aren't stupid, they sensed the manipulation, the narcissism beneath the lyricism. She wasn't writing for reflection, she was writing to justify betrayal. And people could feel that. Meanwhile, Victoria was never seen again, not in our circles, not online under her name. Whether she ghosted Claire by design or simply found another muse to exploit, I'll never know. But Claire's face the one time I asked, just out of curiosity, said enough. She was a phase, Claire muttered. She was a weapon, I replied. The final court hearing came and went without spectacle. My claim wasn't for money, it was for acknowledgement. Daniel had made that clear. You're not trying to bankrupt her. You're just making sure the truth is on the record. The judge agreed. While the lawsuit didn't result in damages, the ruling did confirm public defamation through fictionalized exposure. It was, as Daniel called it, symbolic and strategic. The ruling effectively scared off any future publishers from touching Claire's manuscript. A quiet message sent to the industry: this author had legal baggage. When the court clerk read the decision, Claire didn't react. She sat still, eyes forward, hands clasped. I saw something in her then that I hadn't seen in a long time. Not anger, not denial. Defeat. That night, she emailed me. Not to fight, not to blame, just a single sentence. I thought you'd be the one person who'd never stand in my way. I stared at that line for a long time. And I typed back. You used me as a stepping stone. I just chose not to be walked on. I never heard from her again. 6 months later, my life had settled into something simpler. I wasn't angry anymore. There was no more investigation, no more strategizing. My evenings were quiet again, and not the kind of quiet that aches. The kind that feels earned. I started volunteering at the library once a week. They were short-staffed and needed someone to help with record-keeping and archive transfers. The irony wasn't lost on me, helping preserve books while having once fought one to the ground. One day, I came across a donation bin marked local authors. Inside were a dozen unsold copies of various self-published works, including, I noticed, a print copy of Claire's last short story. There it was, the final breath of a career that had once shown so much promise. No one had borrowed it. Sometimes, people ask me if I regret going public, if I could have just taken the high road and walked away silently. Maybe. But then I remember the look on her face the night she thought I was asleep, when she told her lover not to worry, that he's harmless now. That was never about infidelity. That was about contempt. And contempt has a cost. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't ruin her with lies. I held a mirror to her choices and let the truth ruin her instead. One afternoon at the library, a woman approached me quietly. Middle-aged, reading glasses, a kind face. Were you Claire Henderson's husband? I nodded cautiously. She smiled softly. I used to attend the writer's circle. Just wanted to say, I always thought you handled everything with more grace than most people could have. I thanked her, unsure how to respond. Then she added, some stories are better left unpublished, and some are better told by the people they tried to erase. That stuck with me, because in the end, Claire told her version first. But mine was the one people believed. There's a strange moment after any long storm. A pause where you realize the silence isn't temporary. It's not a break between rounds. It's the end. Claire's name no longer came up in conversation. At the coffee shop, the library, the Saturday markets, her absence wasn't notable. It was accepted, quietly absorbed into the background, like the closing of a long-forgotten bookstore no one noticed had closed. That's how reputations truly end, not with headlines, but with the gradual fading of relevance. Her book was gone from the shelves. Her blog inactive. The last trace of her literary footprint was a dead Amazon listing with a handful of 2-star reviews and a brief note. Author no longer in print. I didn't gloat. Honestly, I felt nothing. Because by the time she vanished from the public eye, I had already let her go in my heart. My days fell into a new rhythm. I accepted a part-time bookkeeping role with a local nonprofit. Nothing fancy, just enough to stay engaged and use my skills. The director once asked me what brought me their way. I told him, I used to track numbers to survive. Now I track them to sleep better. I wasn't lying. Evenings were mine again. I cooked more, learned how to make decent sourdough, bought an old acoustic guitar and played badly but enthusiastically. Read actual fiction, the kind written without hidden daggers inside. Sometimes I'd look at the shelf where I'd once kept Claire's early manuscripts, and I'd think about how stories outlive the people who write them. But not all stories deserve to. Hers didn't. As for Claire, I received one last message about a year after the legal dust settled. A letter, surprisingly, handwritten, in a simple cream envelope with no return address. It read, "You won. I lost more than you'll ever know. But I hope someday you write your side. At least one of us should tell the truth." No signature. No request for contact. I burned it, not out of anger, but because I knew that was her final play. One last attempt to frame herself as the tragic figure. The misunderstood artist. The woman undone by love, not ambition. She was never that woman. She was smart, calculated, ruthless when it served her. But in the end, she mistook empathy for weakness and underestimated how quiet people fight back. One Sunday, I stopped by the bookstore downtown. There was a small local author event in progress. New names, fresh titles, young energy. I didn't know a soul there, but I sat for a reading anyway. A young woman, maybe in her early 30s, stood at the front and read a chapter from her novel. It was good, honest, not polished to death, but full of life. She read a line that made the room go still. The lie hurt, but the pretending it wasn't a lie hurt worse. That landed. Afterward, I approached her, complimented her work, and she smiled wide. "Thank you. Are you a writer?" I shook my head. "No, but I lived through a story once. Someone else wrote it. I just corrected the ending." In the years that followed, I never remarried. Not because I couldn't, but because I realized I didn't need to rebuild what was already whole. I had myself again. I kept my house, kept my peace, kept the lessons. And those were more valuable than vengeance. Because revenge ends with silence, but truth ends with clarity. And I had found mine. Some people write fiction for fame. Others write it for healing. But then there are those who write it to rewrite their own misdeeds, hoping the page will absolve them. Claire tried to do that. But stories, real ones, don't just belong to the author. They belong to those who live them. And I lived this one.